facts are we're in a position where Canada has a comprehensive free trade agreement with the United States. There's certain protocols under that agreement. If temporary tariffs or other tariffs are put in place, those have not been followed. So that agreement effectively has been broken in the short term by U.S. actions. That's the fact. That would be acknowledged, I think, by all sides. Maybe slightly more diplomatic terms would be used, but that's the reality. That puts us in a position where we need to build on what we have in order to reestablish that trust commercially.
Prime Minister Mark Carney with some carefully chosen words there while talking to reporters about the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement. He told them that because the U.S. imposed tariffs on Canada, protocols of the deal were not followed. So it's essentially fractured in the short term. Now, Carney says Canada is looking to this year's CUSMA review as a process to reestablish trust with businesses and investors. And last night, the U.S. Court of International Trade ruled businesses are owed refunds for U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs. It all comes as Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc is headed to Washington tomorrow to meet with his counterpart, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. LeBlanc's office says they'll discuss the CUSMA review as well as bilateral concerns. So what are the stakes for this meeting? Let's ask our front bench. With me now again, Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, Tony Clement, and Monty Solberg. Christy, there's an old saying in show business, timing is everything. So what do you think of the timing of this meeting, even though it was set up last week?
I thought that was a saying from politics, but okay, we'll give it to you. Well, look, I have a lot of confidence in Dominic LeBlanc. I do think, he's a guy that just exudes warmth and, kind of the ability to talk people into things. Now, the Americans are pretty tough customers, but I think he's building or has built a strong relationship south of the border with folks that are negotiating, Jamieson Greer included, I think. So I think we're in good stead there. But the challenge is going to be, rules of origin, for example. How are we going to give some of that up? It's a solid argument, I think, that the Americans don't want to see China coming in the back door through Canada to access the free trade agreement advantages. But on the other hand, Canadians use a lot of Chinese steel for our manufacturing. How are we going to handle EV batteries and things like that? So there's all those issues, and then there's dairy and the other farm-related issues. And I think that that's going to be something that Canada ends up giving more to the Americans on. I just don't see how the supply managed system, despite the fact that it's worked for Canada for a long time, is going to survive this discussion. So there's going to be some give and take there. But I do think ultimately his goal, Dominic LeBlanc's goal right now, is to lower the temperature, to kind of get everything back to an even keel in the discussions and figure out what they're going to do on July 1st, kind of get a feel from the Americans about how things are going to roll once the required comprehensive review begins for 2026.
Monty, there's an aggravating factor in all of this, and on the USTR website earlier today, there was an announcement that the first round of bilateral discussions in preparation for the joint review of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement are starting with Mexico, adding that they're expected to hold their first meeting the week of March 16th. So how much pressure is on LeBlanc to get a similar statement out of his meeting tomorrow?
Well, there may be a certain amount of pressure, but I think the important thing for Dominic LeBlanc, who is a pro and is, very familiar with this sort of negotiation, is to take as much time as he possibly can so he doesn't rush into a position that Canadians later regret. We're in a situation where we have a very tight parliament. I think you want to know that parties have been consulted. This has all been discussed. And you take as much time as you possibly can to come to some kind of decisions on this, because frankly, time is the friend of Canada. It's not the friend of the Americans right now. They're running into midterm elections. They're starting to see politics bubble up on trade. So if Dom LeBlanc can stretch this out as much as possible, that can only work to the advantage of Canadians. But I also think it's just prudent to take your time and really weigh all the dynamics before you come back with any kind of answer to the Americans.
Well, Marco, you're in a unique position. Not only have you been in the Oval Office, you've met some of the people that Dominic LeBlanc is set to meet there. Do you think, as Monty had said, that time is on our side and those people, Jamieson Greer, Howard Lutnick and the like, may be in a bit of a rush to try and make a deal, or is this going at their pace right now?
Well, I have met some of the principals on the other side of the negotiating table, and I do think it's important that we continue to exercise patience and composure, which is something that I think the Prime Minister and Dominic LeBlanc, who I obviously know as well, are very good at doing. I would add one other name into the mix, and that's Janice Charette, former clerk of the Privy Council and advisor to the Prime Minister, and now her new capacity as a chief negotiator. So you have an extremely formidable duo of Canadians who are there on the front lines to do as Christy said, which I think is to try to, get things back on track. Now, I would expand that a little bit and get to what I think our fundamental trade objectives are, which is to get the tariff down to as low as possible, to preserve as much of the CUSMA exemptions, particularly for those sectors of the economy that are vital to our GDP, while addressing that sort of host or that suite of grievances which have sort of interfered with the smooth running of the bilateral trade relationship for some time. And again, they've been itemized. In the meantime, I do think it is important to observe that the president's own case for tariffs has weakened over time. It's weakened in the courts, where the IEEPA tariffs, the fentanyl tariffs, were struck down, and now the courts are taking the next step of ordering the government to refund those tariffs. It has weakened in the House of Representatives, where Congress representatives on both sides of the aisle have voted to overturn the tariffs, specifically with regards to Canada. And it is weakening in terms of the economic impact that they were intended to have, both in terms of the trade surplus numbers, the jobs numbers, as well as the inflation numbers. So yes, I do think it is important that we continue to demonstrate patience, and timing is everything. You are right. My panelists are right, but we got to make sure we get the right deal.
Mm-hmm.
And Tony, add to that the U.S. Court of International Trade ruling businesses are owed refunds. So do you think that that is all basically setting up in our favor for Dominic LeBlanc's sort of opening? It's not going to be his first meeting, but this next meeting. And do you think he can go in there with a bit more of a sort of puffed out chest?
Yeah, let me say a couple things. First of all, this is a tariff president. That's not going to change. So if one aspect of tariffs changes, he'll find another way to do tariffs. I don't think we should get ourselves wrapped up in what federal court has said what about aspects of the tariff battle. That's going to continue on for years. Don't forget, Joe Biden did a bunch of tariffs in his day, and whoever succeeds, Donald Trump is going to do tariffs in their day. Tariffs are a fact of life. I guess I'm the one person on this panel who's advising urgency. I really think that Canadians have to understand that there's a cost to not having a new deal with the Americans. Yeah, I know we have CUSMA, et cetera, but Trump is ignoring CUSMA. So how much of a deal is that? The fact of the matter is this economy cannot last unless there is certainty with the Canada-U.S. trade relationship. There is capital flight happening right now, and it is only accelerating in this country. We are getting poorer by the week. So I really hope that we can find a way to get the issues on the table. Christy has delineated those right now. Get those issues on the table. Start to have serious conversation and get to a better place. I think our economy needs it. I know it's tough for Canadians. They want to jam. They want to jam Trump. I get that. I really do. I get that. But I think if we want to look soberly at the long-term costs for our economy, there really has to be a deal. I would say sooner rather than later. I'm not saying next week or next month, but that process has to start.
I respect you, Tony. Obviously, I just would fact check that this last year we had a record amount of foreign direct investment in Canada. So I do think that there is capital that is coming into this country, and I think that is one of the the wins in our sails that we have to continue to use to press this file forward.
If only our pension funds were investing.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it on that. I appreciate all of you, Christy Clark, Monty Solberg, Tony Clement, and Marco Mendicino. Appreciate you being on today's Front Bench.